you got to understand how soil works if you really want to be successful growing plants.
Again, thanks for being here, and please welcome Eric Feiler.
Hi, and thanks for coming. Tonight I'd like to talk about life underground, and it's the soil food web. And I'm passionate about this. I went through a total paradigm shift about 10 years ago when I met Elaine Ingham, who is one of the world's foremost soils ecologists. And it was over in Boulder, believe it or not. She came and gave a week-long workshop out at the Boulder Mountain Guest Ranch, and I didn't have any idea who she was. I didn't have any idea what biological agriculture was, the soil food web, nothing. My boss offered to pay for me to go. And of course I'm like, well, okay, sounds good to me. And life-changing, completely life-changing. It was one of these facepalm kind of things like, wow, well, of course it works this way. It's such a common sense kind of thing. And the other thing I got out of that week-long workshop is how little most people understand about life in the soil and the soil food web, and how utterly dependent on the soil food web we are, and how little we know about it. Okay? Without the soil food web, without the life in the soil, there wouldn't be any plants as we know them today, and we wouldn't be here. So we are literally, utterly dependent on the soil food web, and I think it's really important for people to start understanding that, because a lot of what we're doing in traditional agriculture is counter the soil food web, okay? And it puts you on a treadmill where you have to take over the role that the soil food web does naturally, and it gets expensive, and it degrades our soils, and it makes our soils go away. So, with that in mind, here we go. What is soil? Okay? I think most people understand that soil is made up mostly of sand, silts, and clays. Okay? There's a little bit of organic matter in there as well. We're used to people calling humus. I always say that. Humus on the top of the soil, which is the decomposing organic matter. There's also some soluble organic matter that leaches down into the sediments and creates the dark color you're used to seeing in soils. That's like humic acids and things like that are soluble organic matter. And most people leave it at that when they come to soil. But the fact of the matter is, soil is much more than that. It also includes life, and it is defined as that. Even in soil textbooks at universities, they say soil has to have life in it. Now, the interesting thing is that most of those universities that are teaching soil scientists mention that soil has to have life in it, and then just leave it at that. They don't talk about the life in the soil. They don't talk about what it does. And it wasn't until like the last 30 years that people really started going, why is all this stuff here? And not only why is all this stuff here, wow, there's a ton of it. The most recent estimates suggest that 56 to 60% of all life on Earth is below ground. That's something nobody ever thinks about, is it? Okay? And not only is it below ground, but it goes miles deep. We've taken samples from drill cuttings, from oil wells and things like that. They're picking up life in those sediments, bacteria, and another kind of life form called archaea, which is like a little bit like bacteria. So they recognize it, but they don't talk about it. So I'm here tonight to talk about it. I wanted to mention abiotic factors. Those are non-life kind of things. Those are disturbances, fires, drought, precipitation. All of those things determine how healthy your soil is. You know, in areas that are really arid, like us, our soils aren't usually that well developed because we just don't have, it takes so much longer without precipitation to create the conditions of a really, really healthy soil. But this is what I want you to get out of this, is that soil is an ecosystem, just like the ecosystems that we're used to seeing above ground. And all the things that happen in the ecosystems above ground, all those predator-prey relationships and relationships between organisms, those all happen below ground too. And in fact, there really shouldn't be any distinction between the life in the soil and the life above soil because it's a gradation. It all starts below ground, but that food chain crosses that barrier, that surface layer, and we get into the terrestrial ecosystem. But that terrestrial ecosystem is all dependent upon the life in the soil. Okay? So let's talk about soil versus dirt. Dirt doesn't have the full complement of microbial life. It's just a medium to hold the plant's roots. Okay? And that's why you have to add ammonium, or you have to add nitrate, or you have to add sulfur, or phosphorus, or potassium. It's because the life is not in the soil to help the plants get those things. So you have to add them. Okay? So there's a big difference between soil and dirt. And I always say my trademark for my business is don't treat your soil like dirt. And it's because dirt is just a medium. Soil is a healthy growing ecosystem. Okay? The nutrients in soil are plant available and they're there all the time. Okay? It retains those nutrients and cycles them consistently unless there's some sort of disturbance activity. Okay? All those nutrients just stay in this cycle in the soil. It retains water. It has structure, so it retains water. It decomposes and cleans out toxins. Okay? The biology is really what's doing this, but you call it the soil because it's all part of the same ecosystem. Soil has structure and it allows water and oxygen to percolate down through the soil column so plants can have really, really deep roots. Okay? And this is really important, aerobic conditions in soil. Soils by definition have to be, well, that's not necessarily true because there are riparian soils that aren't aerobic, and that means oxygen rich. Anaerobic means oxygen poor. Okay? Plants, plants are obligate aerobes. That means they have to have an aerobic environment. They can't live in an anaerobic environment. And even those plants that are living in anaerobic soils, like that are in bogs or swamps or things like that, they have structures inside the plant that actually act like a straw and go up and grab oxygen and bring it down to the roots because the roots don't have enough oxygen. Okay? Dirt does none of those things. Okay? Dirt, you've got to add nutrients to grow your plants. Now, sometimes you don't add enough, sometimes you add too much. If you water too much, they flush out of the system and contaminate your groundwater. Water isn't retained in dirt. Okay? We're going to talk about why this happens as we go along in the talk. But toxins accumulate or they're leached into the groundwater, like I said. There's no structure. What this does is it leads to compaction. And if you've looked out in a field before and seen the water just standing there, that's because there's a compaction layer in the sediment, and water will not make the transition from a loose substrate to a compacted substrate. It just hangs out on that surface. Okay? That causes all sorts of problems. But anyway, soil good, dirt bad. So let's talk about nutrients, because this is really what it's all about. What this whole idea of the soil food web is. It's really about cycling nutrients for the plants that are growing. Of all the things that a plant needs, all of the nutrients that a plant needs, it only gets 2 from above ground. It gets sunlight and carbon dioxide. That's it. Everything else comes from below ground. Okay? So that just means that all soils have all the nutrients a plant needs. No matter where it is on the planet, a soil will have all the nutrients a plant would need. Okay? Pretty cool concept. Here's some visual evidence of that. Here's a forest. We have these Boulder Mountain here, Fish Lake Mountain. The biomass production on an acre of this land is far outstrips any agricultural land out there. Is anybody up there fertilizing this? Is there anybody up there spraying herbicides or pesticides to take care of that? This will be like that for thousands and thousands of years. because all those nutrients are cycling because the life in the soil is there and it's undisturbed. If you were to look in a more technical scientific way, this is from a table from a soil science introductory textbook. And this is 17 nutrients, and they're everywhere they look in the soils. This is a sampling of soils all over the world. And there's all of these nutrients are in the soil. They're there. Okay? You know, you'll get a soil chemistry test from the university and they'll say, you don't have enough nitrogen. Well, you don't have enough of the right kind of nitrogen. There's plenty of nitrogen still in the soil. It's just not available to plants, and it's not being picked up by the soil chemistry tests. So this is the key. Nutrients in the soil, they're there, but they're not there in a plant available form. Okay? What they are is they're locked up in the crystal structure of the sands and the silts and the clays. Okay? They're there, but they're locked up in the rocks, in the crystal structure of the rocks. And it's the life in the soil that unlocks that and makes them available for plants. Okay, we're going to get a little geeky here. Bear with me. You need to do this. You really do. So the total soil nutrient pool is all of that table showing all of the nutrients existing in the sands and the silts and the clays. And if you look here, the biology takes those nutrients, extracts them from the sands and silts and clays, and moves them down into what's called this exchangeable thing. And what that is that you've extracted, say, a phosphorus molecule out of the crystal matrix, and it still has a charge on it. And it's going to sit there, and it's exchangeable because it's taking that charge and it's being attracted to an opposite charge somewhere else in the soil. But it's not locked up in the sands and silts and clays anymore. It's more free to be unlocked again. It's more easily unlocked, and that's called the exchangeable pool. And then biology will continue to work on it again, and it'll come down here and it'll enter the soluble phase, and that's the ones where it becomes plant available. When it can dissolve into water and become soluble, the plants can pick it up, okay? And it's the biology is doing it, and these soluble nutrients are going to the plants through the roots, and they're also, the soil life is doing this for a reason. It's not just doing it because it can. The soil life is extracting all of these nutrients out of the sands and silts and clays because they need it. They need it just like you need all those micronutrients, and a plant needs all those micronutrients. All that soil life in there needs it too, okay? And that's why they're doing it. They extract it, they incorporate it into their body, they might leave a little bit in the soil, but whatever, the end result is stuff that was up here ends up down here because of biology. Now, if you go and send your sample into a soil chemistry lab, they are doing the same thing that biology does. And if you look at this continuum here, we have extremely strong acids up here and basically really weak acids down into water down into here. And that's what the biology is doing. The biology has really strong acids or really weak acids, depending on the type of biology that we're talking about. And it does the same thing that they're doing in a soil chemistry lab, where they take your sample and they grind it up and they pour a bunch of acid on it, and then they take that acid and extract all the stuff that got dissolved out of the sands and the silts and the clays. Okay, we've been talking about this soil life, so here it is. In broad groups, these are the ones that when I'm looking through a microscope, this is what I'm looking for when I'm looking at a soil or a compost, okay? We're looking at bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, earthworms, spiders, blah, 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 blah. And if you notice, what's happening here is we're going up the food chain. These are different trophic levels, just like you have in an ecosystem above ground. We have the primary producers down here, the rabbits and mice and things like that above ground, that the predators consume. And then these predators will consume these lower level predators, and it's just like the food chain that's happening above ground. It's happening below ground. Okay, let's talk a little bit more specifically about these guys. Bacteria. The bacteria in the soil And what the statistic I read today is 70% of all bacteria on the planet is below ground. Okay? Bacteria produces the enzymes that break down simple compounds. There are exceptions to this, and there are some examples of bacteria that can really digest some nasty things. They're finding some that digest plastics and hydrocarbons and things like that. But in general, in terms of what we look at in the soil, bacteria produce enzymes to break down more simple compounds. They make nutrients available by taking them into their body. Any excess that they have, they excrete. It gets excreted in a plant-available form. It was locked up in the sand, silts, and clays, and now it's in a plant-available form. They also take it into their bodies, and if they get consumed, then we start entering that poop loop where the upper-level predators are excreting the excess nutrients they got from eating the bacteria. Okay? Now this is hugely important here, and I know most of you know about this, fixing nitrogen. So nitrogen is like one of the most important nutrients for all life on Earth. It's the basis of your DNA. It's the basis of proteins. It's the basis of enzymes. Everything needs nitrogen, and so that's why we focus on nitrogen when we talk about nutrient cycling, because it's one of the most important ones. Nitrogen's abundant in the atmosphere. 70% of the atmosphere is made up of inert nitrogen gas. Now, nitrogen, the bonds, it's N2. There's two nitrogen atoms together in that nitrogen gas, and it has this incredibly strong bond. And it's really hard to break down. But luckily, we have these types of bacteria that live in the soil that can break that bond and make that nitrogen available for other things. So that's really important. That's why I've kind of got that highlighted. Bacteria make alkaline glues that they ooze onto the outside of their body, okay? And this is important for building soil structure, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the future here. Like right here. Bacteria use this glue, and they take little pieces of sand, silts, and clays and little pieces of organic matter, and they glue them together into these little building blocks called microaggregates. And I like to think of them as bricks, maybe, or stone. And they're not all the same shape. They're irregular in shape. But they're very important, and we'll get to why in just a sec. So this is also basically a really important thing. Bacteria have the highest concentration of nitrogen in their bodies of any organism on Earth. There's basically, we use to measure the nitrogen in your body, we use a ratio called carbon to nitrogen. In bacteria, for every 5 carbon, they have 1 nitrogen, and that's really narrow, 5 to 1. We're like 100 to 1, something like that. So they're a major source of nitrogen for predators who want to have food. They need that nitrogen. They need that nitrogen for cell metabolism and DNA and all those things I said. So they're a source of food. Now, this is looking through a microscope at a pretty unhealthy soil. This is an agricultural soil over in Boulder. This is actually, I'll admit it, this was my soil before I started doing things differently. And you don't know what you're looking at, but I'm going to explain this. All of these, there's tons of silt and clay in here. All of these things that you see that are irregularly shaped are probably sand, silts, and clays. But if you look really carefully, there's very perfect circles and there's ovals. Those are bacteria, okay? And probably 80% of those dots that you're seeing on there are bacteria. Now, you also notice that in this picture, there's not much of anything else. And you'll see that when I compare it to another picture later on. There's a little bit of organic matter here, this kind of darker brown colored stuff, but that's it. There's nothing else in there. Pretty much just bacteria. And this is typical of agricultural soils that are consistently tilled. You basically, what's happening with the tilling is you're killing off a large percentage of that soil food web and leaving only the bacteria. Okay? Next in this lower level, trophic level in the ecosystem of soil are fungi. Now these are what we're used to seeing in fungi, but the vast majority of the plant is actually underground. The fungi lives mostly underground, and this is just like, this is the fruiting body, basically, of a fungi that's living underground. It's the apple of the apple tree, except for the apple tree would all be underground, and the apple would pop up through the soil in a similar kind of metaphor, okay? Fungi produce enzymes and organic acids that break down way more complex compounds than bacteria do. Okay, they can extract stuff from rock. It's amazing. The acids, they produce really, really strong acids, or can produce really strong acids. They take these, after extracting all these nutrients, they recombine them. They incorporate some into their body. They recombine some of them out, some of the excess stuff into things like humic acid, which we're familiar with, right? That's the dark color in soil. Okay. They store tons of this in their body. The main component of a fungal organism, most fungal organisms, not all, but the filamentous fungus organisms, the ones that have threads, are a thread-like structure that weaves its way through the ground. Okay, and it's like a tube. And cell contents can move back and forth through this tube on the ground. The outside of that is created by carbon mostly. Okay, so they can incorporate tons and tons of carbon. If you have a lot of fungi in your soil, you're extracting a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere so they can build their bodies. Okay? They also produce some glue, and that's important because they're taking these microaggregates that I talked about the bacteria making, those little building blocks, those bricks, and they're tying them together with their filaments. And now they're starting to build a bigger aggregate. A weird stone wall made of bricks is the way to think about it. And with this, we're starting to build structure in the soil, starting with these little microaggregates, going on to larger macroaggregates, okay? So kind of tying up all of fungi, they decompose and break down really carbon-rich compounds. Fungi take these microaggregates and start creating a structure in the soil by tying the microaggregates together. And this is another one that's really important in plant science right now. It's big time. Whoops, let me go back. This here, everybody's probably heard of mycorrhizal fungi, okay? Fascinating what this plant will do, this organism, fungi, will do. It'll connect itself to a plant. It'll weave through the soil. It'll connect itself to another plant, and now those two plants can communicate with each other. They can transfer nutrients back and forth. Pretty amazing. You can really go down the rabbit hole if you want to start studying mycorrhizal fungi. So this is a microscopic picture of what fungi looks like in the soil. And there's probably 3 different fungal species here. We've got one here that's out of focus. We've got this really big one here, and then there's this smaller one here, okay? The interesting thing about this one here is if you look closely at that big one in the middle, you see all those bumps on the outside of it. Those are crystals. They're called oxalate crystals, and that's like a pantry on the outside of this fungal hypha. It's taken a lot of those excess nutrients, and it's tied it up into these crystalline structures that they put on the outside of their hypha. It's a storehouse. Pretty cool. There's also a lot of organic matter up here. Not so many bacteria. This is a different soil. There's more fungi in this soil than there are bacteria. Okay. This is a great picture of fungi actually in the soil, the one in the center. All that white stuff are little threads of fungal hypha binding the soil together, okay? Now this over here is even more fascinating. So this is a pine seedling. There's actually 3 pine seedlings. There's one in the middle and 2 younger ones on either side. That pine seedling in the middle, the actual root of that pine seedling is the yellow part. Everything else you see in there is the mycorrhizal fungi that has colonized that root. Okay, and if you look really carefully, it's gone over here and it's starting to colonize this seedling. Okay, so now those 2 plants are connected to each other and can communicate chemically. Okay, now what's really cool, even more cool about this, is it doesn't have to be the same kind of plant. It can be a completely different species of plant, and it'll still attach to it, and those plants can communicate back and forth together. Pretty neat, I think. This is just another picture of different kind of fungi over on the right. Now this is a picture of an extremely healthy soil. Okay, a microscopic view of a completely healthy soil. And you can see there's lots of fungi in it. There's lots of organic matter in here. you wouldn't know it, but I do. This is actually a higher level predator. It's a type of amoeba. And it's there too. The whole food web is here. And it's a really healthy soil. The microaggregates are getting produced. This is a piece of plant debris, I can tell, because you can still see the cell walls in there. But building into maybe a bigger macro aggregate here, you can see how that fungi is grabbing those things and tying them together into some kind of structure. Okay, so together, bacteria and fungi, they do all of the nutrient extraction, put it into their bodies. The really cool thing here, and I'll talk about this again in the future, is using each species can functionally extract different nutrients. They target different nutrients, and that's really important in the future when I talk about how these plants choose which organisms to support. Okay, so they hold, the bacteria and the fungi hold these nutrients in their bodies, and they become food sources for other predators, and they also create soil structure. Those are the three big things that we want to think about. They are the base of the food chain, and not just the above ground. They are the base of the food chain. Your food chain, everybody's. If the bacteria and fungi weren't around, you wouldn't be around. Okay? So this is just a little diagram about soil structure, because it really is so important. You need to have soil structure. You need to have a soil built of all these little different building blocks. So there's channels and tunnels and hallways and big rooms and little rooms, all sorts of different things. That allows water to fill up those spaces. It allows oxygen to go into those spaces. It allows organisms to have a hotel, to go in and live in these spaces. So I don't know if you can understand, but this little square here is blown up here, and then this little square is blown up here, and the same for this one. So what we're doing is we're starting down here at the smallest size, and we've got tons and tons. We have silts and clays. These clays are these little flat plate-like things, because that's what clays particles look like. They look like little flat plates. Silts, clays, organic matter, there's a pore. The bacteria are gluing these all together, okay? The glues that the bacteria are making. We get a little bigger, and the fungi starts to come in and tie them all together, and eventually you get something that's called a macroaggregate. And you have, if you look at a really well-structured soil and you dig a hole in it, you're going to see these. You're actually going to be able to see these kind of structures, okay? Really critically important building structure. Now, we've seen these two pictures before, but I wanted to put them side by side so you can see the difference between what a healthy, really healthy soil looks like under the microscope compared to what an unhealthy soil looks like under the microscope. Almost nothing but bacteria here. We have tons of fungi, a little bit of bacteria. There's some protozoa here. I'm going to talk about protozoa in a second. Lots of organic matter, completely different. Okay, why is soil structure important? Again, I've said this, repetition is the key to learning, I understand, so I'm just going to say it one more time. It allows transport of water through the soil column. It allows oxygen to diffuse through the soil column. It provides habitat, and it allows plant roots to go as deep as they possibly can. A lot of people don't understand that plant roots go, if they have the ability to, if there's no compaction layers or there's nothing stopping them, plant roots will go way deeper than we think they do, okay? There's an amazing study that was done in the early part of the 20th century where they went out into the Great Plains and they dug a deep trench and they cleaned the wall and they put a piece of glass up, and somebody went in there and drew all of the roots on that plane. And these little prairie plants that are this tall have roots that are 30 feet deep, okay? And that's, if you think about it, that's a great thing for drought, right? If you have good soil structure, your plants have a better chance of living through times of stress because there's going to be more water retention, your roots are going to go deeper, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, protozoa, we're jumping up the food chain now. Now we're talking about the predators that are living underground. And these guys are single-celled, they're mobile, and they're hunters, they're predators. They go around and they eat the bacteria, mostly bacteria. Some will eat each other, and some will also eat a little bit of fungi. Okay? They then take inside their body all the nutrients that was in those bacteria, and they say, well, I've got enough nitrogen, I'm going to get rid of the rest of this nitrogen. I'm going to excrete it, and I'm going to excrete it as a form of ammonium. This is really important. This idea of ammonium as the source of nitrogen for plants. Okay, so a lot of plants that can't use ammonium, but that's another part of the story that we'll get to. Okay, here's a picture of a flagellate, little single-celled organism. If you look really carefully, you see this thread coming off of there, and there's another one right here. These are called flagella. They're these long whip-like things, and that thing will flop one of them over so both of them are going on backwards behind it, and it'll sit there and spin them, and it'll push itself through the soil medium, and it consuming bacteria. Not all flagellates look like this, but this is a good example of one. These are called ciliates, another single-celled creature that lives in the soil. And it has all, I'm sorry about that. It has all these hairs on the outside. These are called cilia. And they use them for movement, and they also use them for feeding. And this, you see these sometimes in the soil. They're called a stalk ciliate, and they have this long stalk that is anchored to something, a piece of organic matter or a piece of sediment, and they'll extend their head out, and their head has all these little cilia on them, and they'll start spinning them around like helicopter blades, and it creates a vortex, and that vortex sucks the soil into it, and it becomes a filter feeder, and it starts filtering out the bacteria with that vortex. I could watch these guys for hours under the microscope. Amoebas, okay? They're just a blob. Everybody's pretty much used to this kind of amoeba. They don't really occur in our soils very much. I've seen maybe 2 in all of the soils I've looked at from around here. But these guys are also amoeba. And this is what they look like mostly. And they're like a hermit crab. They actually create this shell. It's called a test. And they live inside of it. It's got an opening on one end. And when it wants to feed, the amoeba oozes out of that and goes out and grabs whatever food it needs to consume. If something happens, like you have a soil sample in your test tube and you shake your test tube up and there's an earthquake as far as these guys are concerned, right? They suck themselves into the test and then take this organic matter and plug that hole. So it's a way to protect themselves just like a hermit crab. It's really cool. We see these a lot in our soils, okay? Nematodes. Now, most people, when they hear nematodes, they go, oh no. And that's because nematodes really do have a bad name, and they do some major, major damage to crops. But most nematodes are actually beneficial, okay? And we don't really talk about those very much. But we have bacterial-feeding nematodes, and we have fungal-feeding nematodes. Okay, this is a fungal. This is the nematode. This is its mouth down here, and it's just sucking in bacteria and consuming them. This is a fungal-feeding nematode, and if you look closely, it has this long, sharp, needle-like spear coming out of its mouth. It even has another one back here. That's like a deciduous tooth almost. They can lose the spear, and they've got another one back there in case they need it. They'll take that spear and they'll go up to a fungal hypha and they'll poke a hole in it, and then they'll suck all the cell contents out of it. Okay? These are both really good nematodes to have. You want to see these. You want to see these. These are the ones you don't want to see. These are root feeders. Okay? And if you look here, it has this really stout needle-like thing with a big knob on the end of it. That knob is for muscle attachments. And when this guy gets going, that needle looks just like a sewing machine. And it goes up to, I could also watch these guys for hours. They'll go up to there's 2 kinds of root-feeding nematodes. There's kinds that actually just consume the roots, and there's some that actually will poke a hole in the root and go inside and lay their eggs. So these are the root knot nematodes. But that that needle thing, and it busts up the cell wall and then sucks the cell contents out. Bad guys. Luckily, we have predatory nematodes. Now this is a huge magnification, but this is the mouth of a predatory nematode. And you can see these giant teeth, and that's what they are. They're teeth. They're chitinous. They're really hard. And luckily, predatory nematodes really like root-feeding nematodes and go out of their way to consume root feeders. Okay? Bacterial feeding nematodes, fungal feeding nematodes, and predatory nematodes are all contributing to nutrient cycling. Okay? They're all really important. Root feeders, not so much. Microarthropods, we're getting farther and farther up the food chain now, underground here. These are higher level predators. These guys mostly consume fungi and bacteria, okay? And they really do look like your worst nightmare, okay? These are electron microscopy pictures of some microaggregates. And these guys are, I mean, they're so small you can't see them unless you're looking at 400x magnification. But they're very cool to find. Don't find them a lot in our soils. Our soils are just, well, most of the soils I look at are from gardens or agricultural soils, and they're just not stable. The ones that I've looked at in the mountain, if I've looked at forest soils, they're full of these guys in there. So, okay, we're getting close to closing this up and closing the circle here. So this is like the 30,000 foot view of what's happening in the ecosystem below ground, okay? We have the nutrients up here that are in the sands and the silts and the clays. They're also in the organic matter, okay? The fungi and the bacteria decompose them or extract them from the sands and silts and the clays. They incorporate the nutrients into their bodies. The soil predators come in and consume the bacteria and the fungi. They excrete the excess as critter poop. It becomes plant-available nutrients. Plants take that up, they grow, they are incorporating those nutrients into their structure as well, right? Okay? They die, well, all those nutrients then just go back in here into the organic matter on top of the surface, and it's a virtuous circle. All those nutrients just keep getting recycled from one organism to another, from one organism to another, unless there's some sort of disturbance event, and then things don't happen that way anymore. Another different way to look at this, these are the trophic levels that most people are used to thinking about when they think about the food chain or ecosystems. And here we have the organic matter and the nutrients, and then our first trophic level, the second trophic level, everything we've just talked about. This red line right here is basically the soil surface, okay? So what this is showing, what I'd like this to show, is that there's no difference between the ecosystem that's below ground and the ecosystem that's above ground. They're connected. They're part of the same thing. It just happens that right here, a terrestrial, I guess you'd call them predators at this level, terrestrial predators are eating soil microbes or soil organisms. It's still part of the same ecosystem. So we really shouldn't be separating the two. And without this, there is no this. Okay? One more cool thing that soil biology does, and it's something that's overlooked a lot, and it's one of the reasons that when you're in traditional agriculture that pesticides and herbicides and things have to be used so much, is because the soil biology is not there to help the plant defend itself. And that's what the biology is doing it. And let's talk about that a little bit more. Okay, plants, remember, only get carbon dioxide and sunlight from above ground. Using solar power, they take that carbon dioxide and they split it up. They want the carbon. The plants want that carbon. The oxygen, we're lucky. That's excess, that's waste as far as the plant is concerned, but we use it. Okay, we wouldn't be here if this wasn't happening. Okay? The plants take those carbons and they put them in chains, into these carbon chains. And depending on what they add to it, whether it's they add a nitrogen to it or phosphorus to it or whatever, it makes sugars, carbohydrates, amino acids, or proteins, simple proteins. So the plant's creating this out of solar power and carbon dioxide. So, well, why is it doing this? Why is the plant? Well, it's making some of those things for itself, certainly. It needs some proteins. It needs those things. It needs the proteins for enzymes and things like that. But it makes way more. The plant makes way more than it needs. And what does it do with those? Well, it makes an exudate, okay? The vast majority, if we're looking at a perennial plant, and I'm just going to use perennials as an example, the vast majority of these exudates that a plant makes through photosynthesis are shunted down into the roots. They're extruded, or exuded on all surfaces of the plants, but 70% of them go to the roots. Not for storage, but they get exuded, hence the term exudate, right? Now, why would they do this? Okay, so let's think about this. Carbohydrates, starches, if those were sitting on your counter, they might be a cookie, a cake, something like that. You're going to snarf on that, right? Well, that's what happens here, okay? The exudates are getting pushed out of the roots, and they're feeding the soil biology. It's a major food source for all the biology that's living in the soil. And what happens is you get this huge, massive population of fungi, bacteria, and then the predators come in because the fungi and bacteria are there right next to the surface of the root, right next to it. And it actually can become so thick that it becomes a physical barrier. Okay, and that can keep out root knot nematodes. This physical barrier is so strong. It can, all sorts of other pests that are soil-borne cannot find infection sites. If the soil food web is operating properly and this castle wall, this physical structure is encasing the roots. What else is happening? So the biology is making all of these nutrients plant available and excreting them as waste. Well, that's all happening now right next to the root because there's these massive populations that have been produced because the plant sent down all of this amazing food to its roots. Okay? Elaine Ingham calls these castle walls. That's why I had to put it in there. So this is an electron microscopy photograph of a corn leaf. And you cannot see the surface of that corn leaf at all. It's completely covered with biology. Now, you're saying, well, how come I can see the green? Well, most of the biology is translucent or transparent, so it doesn't have any color, so the color of the leaf comes through. But this is what the surface looks like. This is covered with fungi, all sorts of different. There's nematodes in there. There's protozoa in there. The blobby stuff in between are glues that the bacteria are making. It's completely covered the surface of this corn leaf. Again, making a physical barrier that's protecting the plant from pests and diseases. This is really cool. Plants can produce exudates that attract specific organisms. So what this is important, why this is important is because say a plant recognizes that it's low on magnesium or whatever, choose one, phosphorus. It says, I need this, and I know that that particular fungi is really good at extracting magnesium from sands and silts and clays, and I happen to have this exudate that fungi really likes. So it ramps up production of that exudate, sends it down into the roots, starts growing out that fungi goes out, grabs the magnesium into its body, and the whole nutrient cycling thing starts happening right next to the plant roots again. Nature is so cool. Figured this out billions of years ago. And so, okay. This sounds like I'm shifting gears, and I'm kind of, but it really fits into this whole idea of ecosystems and succession, okay? What is the difference between an annual versus a perennial? Well, these are the three things that really determine them: the food preference, its life cycle, and the soil health status. The food preference. Most annuals, the form of nitrogen that they prefer, and actually they can't really use the other form, is nitrate. Most annuals use nitrate as their form of nitrogen. Now you go, but Eric, you just said ammonium is the form of nitrogen that is produced by this soil food web stuff. So how does that work? I'll talk about that in a second. The life cycle of an annual is, what's most important to an annual? It's not its root development. It just needs to get its roots down into the ground, and what it wants to do is produce as many seeds as it can as fast as it can. That's what an annual usually does. Okay? Perennials are completely different. They're more interested in developing their root system than they are their above ground system. Okay? Now, soil health status. This is key because this has a huge amount to do with what type of nitrogen is available in the soil. Stay with me here, okay? So here we have the general idea of succession that everybody's used to, right? All things being equal, precipitation being enough and everything like that. If you have a disturbance event and end up down here, you're going to start growing annuals first. Eventually, your soil will be getting better and better, and you'll start growing some grasses and shorter-lived perennials, then shrubs, a little bit longer-lived perennials, all the way up through the forests and stuff that we know. That's in an ideal situation, right? And for us, this is what we'd be used to seeing around here, right? These are the weedy annuals we're used to seeing. Russian thistle, tumble mustard, cheatgrass. Everybody knows all about those, right? Then as we get up a little higher and higher in elevation, but also a little bit higher in succession in terms of soil health, we start getting perennial grasses and shrubs, some forbs in there as well. And then we get up into the woodlands, and these are precipitation dependent usually. Okay, aspen belt, mixed conifer forest, subalpine conifer forest. Okay, and this is putting it all together. Okay, so there's this black line here. Above ground, this is what we see. Below ground, this is what's happening. Okay, whoops, sorry about that. Below ground, in these kind of systems, these annual systems, we have a soil that is bacterially dominated. Okay, and nitrate is the main source of nitrogen. Again, you're like, where does the nitrate come from? You said ammonium. We're going to get there. As we go farther and farther up the succession scale, we get to a fungally dominated soil where there's very little bacteria, and we can have 1,000 times more fungi than bacteria. Where down here, we actually have almost no fungi and nothing but bacteria. Okay? The type of nitrogen is totally dependent upon this fungal to bacterial ratio. Okay? Bacterially dominated soils are going to have nitrate. Fungally dominated soils are going to have ammonium. And this is how that works. This is the nitrogen cycle. I'm sure you've seen this. This is way too complicated, so I'm going to simplify it. And what we have here, so this is nitrogen in the atmosphere. And we're focusing on nitrogen again, remember, because it is one of the most important nutrients. This 2 atoms of nitrogen are bonded together with these 3 incredibly hard to break bonds. But luckily, in the soil, we have these bacteria that have the ability to break that nitrogen apart and then recombine that nitrogen into a form that can be used by plants and other organisms. Okay? So it comes down here, the plants can use it now. The plant produces protein and carbohydrates. It puts it out into the roots. It feeds the bacteria and fungi with the exudates, right? But then it also might die, and the decomposers start breaking down that plant, and all of the nutrients that are within that plant, the decomposers incorporate into themselves, and then the predators come along and eat the decomposers, and voila! Out comes your ammonium, okay, in plant-available form. Now, here's your nitrate up here. How does that happen? What happens is, just like there's a type of bacteria over here that can break that nitrogen bond, there's a type of bacteria over here called nitrifying bacteria, there's many kinds, that can take this ammonium, and what those nitrifying bacteria want is they want the hydrogens. They want those 4 hydrogens that's down there in that ammonium molecule. They don't want the nitrogen. So this is a waste product. When these nitrifying bacteria take this ammonium and break it apart and take off those hydrogen atoms, they spit out nitrate as a waste product. Okay? Now, this is the biggest important thing here. pH greater than 7. This can only happen, this nitrifying bacteria, the enzyme that they use to break this down can only operate in alkaline conditions. Okay? So we only will get nitrate in alkaline conditions, and most alkaline conditions occur in bacterially dominated soils because bacteria, remember, produce alkaline glues. Fungi produce organic acids. So fungal soils are acidic, bacterially dominated soils are alkaline. Okay? Now, where do we see most of our weeds? In disturbed soils, right? Okay, what happens when you disturb a soil? You kill everything, particularly the fungi, and you no longer have a source of organic acids, and your pH goes up. It becomes alkaline. And so disturbance creates an alkaline environment that allows this nitrate to occur. Weeds love nitrate. You find a disturbed soil, you're going to find weeds in it because all of the soil life has been killed except for the bacteria, and now we're in an alkaline condition and we're creating nitrate. So, as a final kind of diagram, annuals use nitrates to grow a plant. The plant grows using the nitrate, the annual plant does, or if it's a perennial, it uses ammonium, and then this whole cycle. You can either create this cycle, right, or you can create this cycle. But it's still a cycle. All of the nutrients are getting reused and reused and reused and reused. Okay? And then, of course, the sunlight and the carbon dioxide coming in from the other side. Okay. A healthy soil food web and a healthy soil. Nutrients are present in a plant available form 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Might be slower in the winter, but that's okay. Plants don't need as much nutrients in the winter. A healthy soil, always there. The nutrients are cycled, they're retained, they're always there. They don't lose nutrients. If you go in and grow a field of wheat and you take everything off, you've taken a considerable amount of nutrients out of that soil. Now, if you just harvested the grain and let the chaff fall onto the ground, you're letting some of those nutrients come back into the system, okay? It retains water, it has structure, there's porosity in the soil. Little holes, little pores in the soil can fill up with water and it'll stay in there, okay? It decomposes toxins. It allows oxygen to diffuse through the soil column. Plant roots need oxygen. They will die without oxygen. And because of this, we also have disease and pest suppression because you're growing out this huge amount of biology right next to the plant roots. And any soil-borne pathogens are going to have difficulty attacking the roots of any plant that's growing in a healthy soil. So what can you do for your soil? Well, this is the big one. You're doing it tonight. You're recognizing the importance of the soil ecosystem. You need to, if you're a grower and you want to grow in your garden, or you're a farmer or a rancher, you need to take on a new mindset. And your mindset is, oh my God, I just acquired a huge new livestock herd. And that livestock herd lives below ground. And that's your first goal, is to make that livestock herd happy. Everything else will flow from that. Okay, start thinking about being a soil farmer or a soil rancher, as it were. So the biggest way to do this is always have plants in the ground if you can do that. They always talk about winter cover cropping. Yes, yes, yes. Okay? The reason that is because you're keeping the biology alive over winter because there's roots in the ground. And the roots are putting out exudates and keeping the biology alive. Okay? If you can't have plants in the ground all the time, at least mulch it. Cover it with mulch. Okay? That mulch is still going to be a food source for some of that biology. It's also going to protect the surface from rain. Rain events cause a lot of compaction. I don't think people understand that, but if you have bare ground and it rains on it, it can cause compaction, and that's not good. Feed your biology. Mulch is a food source. Lots of other food sources. You can give them fish hydrolysate, oils. You know, if you want to know a giant list, call me up. We'll talk about how to feed your biology. But the biggest thing you can do is compost. Okay? And make your own compost or acquire compost from somebody who's making compost. Don't rely on commercial compost. Okay? The business model for commercial composting facilities is waste stream management. It's not production of compost. Production of compost is a byproduct of them managing their waste stream. And they just want, as soon as that compost gets down to ambient temperature after it's gone through heating cycles, it's out the door. You can't do that. If you want to make really good compost, you have to age your compost just like a fine wine or a liquor. It needs to age. Give the biology a chance to develop within your compost. Compost on your property. You should be doing it, even if it's just a worm bin. It's the easiest way to compost in the world, is to have a worm bin. And they make the best compost too, by the way. Worms make far better compost than people do because that's what they do. That's their life. They make compost. Minimize physical disturbance. Now, if you're a farmer, you're going to have your tractor on the field. But minimize how often you do it. Or try and use the same tracks for your tractor or whatever. The more you drive a tractor on your field, the more you're compacting. If you're plowing or tilling, you're killing the soil biology. And that's why no-till agriculture is taking off. And you'll have people say, oh, it doesn't work. Well, I tell those people that say it doesn't work, get on YouTube and look up a guy named Rick Clark and tell me that it doesn't work. Okay? This is a big-time farmer in central Illinois. And he's outproducing he's got tens of thousands of acres, and he's outproducing all of his neighbors, and he doesn't add anything to his soils anymore. Okay, it's not a magic bullet. He didn't do that right away. It took him about 10 years before he really started seeing amazing results. But 17 years on, he's not adding anything. And his point is, I may not produce as much as my neighbors do, but it doesn't cost me as much to produce. I'm not having to buy amendments. I'm not having to buy herbicides and pesticides and fertilizers. So my return on investment is way higher than my neighbors. And in fact, he actually does outproduce them in terms of yield. But he had that philosophy when he was first starting out. Even if I'm not outproducing him, I'm still making more money because I'm not putting out as much money. Okay? So minimize your physical disturbance. No-till agriculture. Minimize, or if you can, eliminate the use of asides, herbicides, pesticides. Asides kill things. And as much as the chemical companies want to tell you that they're targeted, this only kills this. Wrong. That's not true. It disrupts everything, and it kills the soil biology. It's not to say that sometimes you might need to do it. You have such a bad problem that you might need to use it, but then you can go back in behind with your compost and reestablish the soil life that's supposed to be there. That's it. This is my contact information if anybody would like